I never imagined my grandson would have a developmental disorder. He's like a broken toy, just useless. He's not good enough for our family." The moment my father blurted out those words, the atmosphere froze. It happened at my sister's funeral. She had been raising her son, who has a developmental disorder, as a single mother. But she passed away, leaving him behind. My parents were just talking nonsense. They were completely out of place, as if an invisible wall had been built around them, causing people to drift away. I didn't want my sister's son to hear what such people were saying. Thinking this, I covered his ears with my hands and glared at my parents. However, the two of them continued to talk about their selfish opinions without paying any attention to the surroundings. "Take care of him yourself. We have no intention of dealing with him." Yes, that's right. Being infertile and not having kids isn't so bad when you have him. That made me so angry. My head was about to explode. I was already planning on taking care of him. I couldn't entrust him to people who could only think in such a biased way. Of course, we'll take care of raising him. We will definitely raise him with love, and we will cut ties with you. As my husband and I said this strongly, my parents left with a sneer, unaware of what they would face. As time passed, my name is Julia. I'm 30 years old, a working housewife living with my kind-hearted husband Nick, who is 1 year older than me. We don't have children. We had talked about wanting children before we got married, but it didn't happen. After tests, it was revealed that I have a condition that makes it difficult for me to get pregnant. We discussed for days whether to undergo treatment, but Nick said, "I'm happy as long as I can live happily with you, even without children. So I don't want you to worry too much." And my in-laws also said, "We just want you both to be happy. Yes, we will support whatever you two decide." I remember them saying kindly, which made me burst into tears. Until then, I had felt sorry for Nick and my in-laws. But hearing them, I thought, maybe I don't need to feel guilty since my family, Nick and my in-laws, said it's okay not to have children. That's fine. As I came to think that way, my worries lessened and I feel more at ease. However, the worry did not completely disappear. The reason lies with my parents. They are concerned about what others think and always brought up the topic of children every time we met. Nick and my in-laws understand, so we plan to live together without kids. Even when I explained this, they would say, "Don't you want to repay us by giving us grandkids?" Or, "What will we do when our neighbors ask, 'Hasn't your eldest daughter had any children yet?'" Nick also tried to explain, but they wouldn't listen. "You're really a failure. I wish you would learn from your sister Erica." My parents always compared me with my sister Erica, who was 1 year younger than me. They favored her over me from the beginning, and the issue with children seemed to accelerate that. Erica was not only smart but also athletic and liked by everyone around her. She never bragged about her abilities, always humble and with good character. I liked her too, and we had a good relationship as sisters. I hardly got in touch with my parents, but Erica and I occasionally kept in touch. She has a son named David, now 6 years old. As he grew, it became apparent that he had a developmental disorder. That was the reason she had divorced her husband. "Sis, please keep this a secret from Mom and Dad," Erica said to me, considering their unusual concern for appearances. Who knows what they would say if they found out about David's developmental disorder? Of course, I agreed. While keeping David a secret from our parents, I have been helping her raise her child as a single mother. Then one day, I received a call from the police on my smartphone. "Are you Erica's sister? It's about your sister." After seeing that, the female police officer on the other end of the line fell silent, as if troubled. Something didn't feel right, and even though it wasn't hot, I was still sweating like crazy as my heart raced, and I tried to calm myself. She continued, "Erica has died in an accident." After inhaling sharply, I found myself unable to speak, my mouth hanging open with a mind gone blank. I somehow managed to convey what the police had said to Nick. He placed a hand on my shoulder, repeating Erica's name in an attempt to calm me amidst his own shock. Time quickly passed in a blur due to funeral preparations, and before we knew it, it was the night before the wake. Even then, I couldn't fully grasp that she was no longer in this world. I kept thinking she might call me the next day, or that she might come over and have dinner with Nick and me again. I was preoccupied with such thoughts. I wondered whose funeral I was attending, though it felt like a dream. There was no mistake that Erica's name was present in the funeral hall, her portrait framed and displayed. Ah, is she really gone? While I was mourning with Erica's friends, I heard a voice echo through the funeral hall. Look who decided to show up, our daughter who let us down. You still haven't managed to have a kid. I couldn't understand how they could say such things at their own daughter's funeral. My parents were acting like they couldn't see how upset everyone was and just kept insulting me. Friends and relatives looked at my parents with disbelief, clearly seeing the absurdity in their words. It was evident to everyone there that my parents were out of place, saying such bizarre things. However, being in public and grieving Erica's absence made me feel as if my heart was being torn apart. Not just Julia, it seems Erica was an embarrassment as well. All our affection for her seems foolish now. I never thought my grandson would have a developmental disorder. He's like a broken toy, just useless. He's not good enough for our family. My parents were just babbling nonsense. They were completely out of place, as if an invisible wall had been built around them, causing people to drift away. I didn't want my sister's son to hear what such people were saying. Thinking this, I covered his ears with my hands and glared at my parents. Take care of Gavin yourself. We have no intention of dealing with him. Yes, that's right. Being infertile and not having kids isn't so bad when you have him. That made me so angry. My head was about to explode. I was already planning on doing that. I couldn't entrust him to people who could only think in such a biased way. Of course, we will take responsibility for raising this child. We will definitely raise him with love, and we will cut ties with you. After saying that, my parents briefly looked shocked but then scoffed. Oh, do as you please, and left the scene. 10 years later, David had turned 16. Although he initially seemed unsure and out of place living with us, he now appeared completely at ease. Having hit his growth spurt, he had grown rapidly, surpassing my height. David is not quite as tall as Nick yet, but he's getting there. He's growing like crazy. One day after work, Nick told me about a weirdo lurking near our place. He seemed pretty stressed out. Nick described seeing a person wearing a deep hooded parka, unable to discern their gender or age, looking like they were searching for someone. If you go out, Julia, please be careful, Nick advised. Heeding the advice, I was cautious about my surroundings for a few days when going out. However, I didn't encounter the suspicious individual Nick had mentioned. Perhaps they were no longer in the area. Just when I had let my guard down, on my way home from shopping, that person appeared in front of my house. 2 individuals were sitting boldly. Could they be thieves? No, that would be too conspicuous. Wondering about their purpose, I was about to reach for my smartphone to possibly call the police when they shouted, "Julia, is that you? We've been looking for you." I nearly dropped my smartphone in surprise. I managed to pocket it and looked toward the duo who had called out. The hoods fell back, revealing without a doubt the faces of my parents. Having cut ties and not heard from them in 10 years, I never expected to see them again, especially coming to see me. Curiously, I looked at them, wondering what they wanted. When did you build a house without telling us? If you have that kind of money, you should give some to us. You're such an ungrateful daughter, can't you think of us? I was dumbfounded by what they said. Indeed, my parents have been ostracized by their friends, colleagues, and relatives due to their appalling behavior at Erica's funeral. That makes sense. They were pointing fingers instead of understanding, which made them seem like heartless jerks to everyone. Especially at my father's company, where his usual arrogance had already spread bad rumors. Nobody doubted the rumors because it was typical of him to do something unreasonable. As a result, he was naturally moved to a less significant department. Somehow he managed to work there for 10 years, but had recently opted for early retirement and became unemployed. So you're saying you're short on money, but you should have received a severance package. My father looked down, shaking his head in frustration. He had quickly squandered his severance pay and savings. However, I was more resigned than surprised. He had always been prone to wasting money, buying unnecessary things, and letting them collect dust. Even when I lived at home, presumably he had spent all his money, forgetting about the future lack of income, and came to rely on me when he realized he had no money for living expenses. I reported a failure like you until you were an adult, so it's only natural for you to repay us for those expenses. Faced with my father's illogical arguments, I instinctively put my hand to my forehead and sighed. Their refusal to consider getting jobs themselves was characteristically selfish in a bad way. How come you didn't pay us back before building your house? Your son, David, is a disaster, but you're still taking out a mortgage. My mother ran nonsensically. However, they seem to be misunderstanding something. We didn't take out any mortgage, though. What? My mother tilted her head, looking confused. I glanced at my father, who mirrored her expression. This house was made possible thanks to David. What do you mean? I decided to explain the whole story to my parents. David got really good at coding and used his ability to focus to make apps online. He had been interested in machines since he was young, often intently observing the family computer. Originally, I worked from home using a computer, and one day, seeing me, he expressed a desire to try it too. So I let him start with simple games. As he deepened his knowledge and got his own computer, he became even more engrossed. One of his apps became a hit, allowing us to lead a comfortable and happy life. Of course, not all the app's earnings were spent on buying the house. Most of it was saved. We planned to use it for David's education and living expenses so he can focus on what he loves. Well, if he's such an amazing kid, you should have said so earlier. Suddenly, my mother's attitude changed drastically, and she began to speak in a sweet voice. She put on a forced smile, with her lips trembling slightly, while my father made exaggerated hand gestures. A failure like you can't possibly nurture David's talent. We'll take him in. Had they forgotten what they said at Erica's funeral? Seeing their sickening behavior was unbearable. What are you talking about? You were saying horrible things before. My parents closed in on me step by step as I retreated. With no passersby around, there was no one to call for help. Just as I was casting my gaze around, wondering what to do. What are you doing? Nick's cold voice resonated. Before I knew it, he was standing beside me, effectively putting an arm around my shoulder. Shut up, let us see David. That won't be possible, please go home. His resolute demeanor momentarily intimidated my parents, but they quickly regained their composure, glaring sharply and demanding to be let into the house. Stop if you plan to stay here any longer, I'm calling the police. With that, my parents reluctantly left. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that they wouldn't give up so easily. My predictions soon proved accurate as they reappeared several days later, dressed in the same suspicious parkas, making me rub my eyes in déjà vu. This time. However, there was a particular reason why we had planned to meet them, so their arrival was actually convenient. Let us in, we want to see David, they demanded over the intercom. Seemingly taken aback when I promptly let them in, looking somewhat bewildered, they walked into our home as if it were their own, inspecting everything from the television in the living room to the vase, Nick's collection of mangas, and the shelf filled with David's programming books. They touched everything without permission, displaying an irritating sense of entitlement. I've made some coffee for you, please take a seat. It was only after I invited them to sit that they finally stopped their invasive inspection and settled down at the dining table. My parents sat side by side with me, David and Nick opposite at them. I was anxious they might try to pull David away if he sat at the end. You know why we're here today, right? It's about David, of course. We knew that's what they were here for. Nick and I stiffened our expressions. Since we accepted you to take in David despite your infertility, he should at least pay us a reward. If we hadn't said anything, someone with a terrible personality like yours wouldn't have fought to take him in, right? I wanted to retort that the one with a terrible personality was them. After all, weren't they the ones who had no intention of taking David in? I still remembered the harsh words they had spewed at the funeral. They had clearly stated they had no intention of caring for David. Nick, with his good memory, must remember it just as I do. Come on, David, why don't you live with us? We raised your mother, Erica, with so much love. My mother began to fervently describe how much love they had poured into Erica since she was a child. How they never got angry at her, bought her books, toys, clothes, and accessories, anything she wanted. How they celebrated her birthdays with grand parties at home. I remembered what my mother recounted, but also remembered how she would unfairly lash out at me as if I were to blame for something I hadn't done, and how I never received proper gifts from them. Erica seemed troubled by their favoritism too. When I was unjustly scolded in her place, she would cry and apologize, saying, "I'm sorry, sis, it's my fault." And on occasions like my birthday, she would secretly celebrate with me, gifting me cute hair accessories or cosmetics she bought with her allowance. Erica realized something was wrong with our parents' behavior and grew up normally and kind without being influenced by their mindset. Apparently, my parents mistook this as a result of their good parenting. See, just like I raised Erica to be such a gentle child, I'll raise you the same way. My parents poured their hopeful gaze into David. However, he made a puzzled face and said to me and Nick, "Who are these people?" It had been 10 years since he last saw them, and perhaps due to their lack of money, their appearances had drastically aged and became unkempt, making it understandable that he didn't recognize them. Shocked by being forgotten, my parents were speechless, their mouths opening and closing without words. Frozen, leaning forward at the table, Nick handed them something. My father, noticing it first, slowly turned his gaze and opened the envelope to pull out its contents. "What? How did you get this?" My mother, prompted by my father's surprised voice, looked over, and they both saw documents proving their gambling debts. Nick had suspected their identities as the suspicious individuals from the beginning and had hired a detective agency to investigate. "We cannot hand over David to you, not just because of your financial instability due to deaths, but also because you're not trustworthy as individuals." Nick's tone was stern, a rarity when he speaks to his elders, conveying his anger. "Besides, we've already cut ties, right? So we owe you nothing." Nick nodded firmly in agreement. "Stay away from our precious son, David." Intimidated by his assertiveness, my parents collapsed from their chairs with a clatter. They didn't seem to hurt themselves badly, but struggled to stand up due to their weakness. "Damn it, why are you all so ungrateful?" With those parting words, they finally left. Nick and I watched them leave and then hugged David tightly, relieved. Later, we heard the parents had to sell their house to pay off their debts. "Please let us stay for a while. We have nowhere to go." They had asked relatives and acquaintances, but no one would take them in. Their behavior at the funeral had spread, and no one wanted to invite such unreasonable people into their homes for fear of what they might do. That's what they deserved. They came to us, but we firmly refused. "We prefer if you didn't involve us any further. As I've said before, we've cut ties with you. It was your decision to accept this, so we're under no obligation to provide you with money or a place to live." With that, they left with a look of despair and have not returned since. We told them we'd call the cops if they came back, and that seemed to scare them off. Without a place to stay, they began living almost like homeless people, unable to secure a job due to their age and surviving day to day on short-term jobs. There was this middle-aged couple scanning job listings at the grocery store, but I left before I could figure out if they were my parents. They couldn't afford their phone bills anymore and had to cancel their smartphones. I've changed my number just in case, ensuring they can't contact us anymore. We no longer have to fear the doorbell or phone ringing. The three of us now live in peace. I continue my work from home, and David is next to me, working on his computer, developing new apps. He always happily shares his progress with me and Nick. I wonder if he'll tell us about his next app completion. I look forward to it and can't wait to see what he creates next. Together with Nick, I'm committed to nurturing David's talents further.